Good morning. At least it's morning here on the West Coast, 11 o'clock on the East Coast. I want to thank everyone for making their time available for joining us on this call today. Your time is precious, so I hope to offer you as much value as I can. So let me start a screen share so we can see what we're talking about today. And so today we're going to talk about success begins with mindset. So let me start that with something of a provocative statement. And that is, if the owner wants a better business, first, the business needs a better one of those. If the owner wants a better business, so all business problems are a personal problem in disguise, or as Warren Buffett puts it at the minute, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. And so in an effort to address that, within a few short weeks, the business world has shifted dramatically. Times like these are the test of your leadership and management skills. And people are asking, what should I do now? How do I plan for a future when I don't know how long this is going to last? How do I keep my staff and, in fact, myself focused and engaged? What should I focus on? Do I hold steady or make changes? Should I be cutting expenses? It's in times like these, it becomes crystal clear that you are in charge. You're the leader. Your clients, customers, staff, and colleagues are looking to you for guidance. So how you emerge from this crisis is going to depend on what you do now. You can panic, retreat, or be a victim of circumstances, or you can move forward with determination, facing reality and making tough decisions that leadership demands of you, calling on your creativity, resourcefulness, and not only to get you through this challenge, but to emerge on the other side with a business that's stronger than ever. And to that end, I'd scheduled this webinar some months ago, and well before circumstances are what they are. But I still think it's very, in fact, if anything, even more relevant, because our mindset is going to be the foundation of our success. So before I dive into the depths of what I had in mind for our time together today, I wanted to make an offer. And that offer is that starting in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, April 8th is the first available time slot. What I'd like to be able to do is offer an online peer group resource center. So it's free. Come along at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern. You can do that by clicking on the link huddlewithjohn.ca, which will take you to the Zoom link. And what I hope this can do for people is to offer a peer group resource, and the shape that'll have is that every week, everyone on the call will have an opportunity to declare what was their biggest win of the week, or what are they most grateful for. And then secondly, what is your biggest question or challenge or focus at the minute? And you'll have an opportunity to get some input from everyone else on the call, your peer group, as well as whatever I might be able to offer. And so this could be a kind of a beacon, a resource, a place where you can huddle up with people that are, present business owners, colleagues just like you, are experiencing some of what you're experiencing. And I hope this becomes something that's important and powerful and useful for you. So starting on April 8th, everyone's welcome, past clients, current clients, prospects, anyone who's got a question or a comment. And this is something to sort of up the game of what's available from W5 Coaching. So having said all of that, let's move along and talk about what success is. Success begins with mindset. So this started when I read Carol Dweck's book. Mindset is the name of her book, and she's a Stanford professor, very well regarded, very respected. And in this book, she said people generally have one of two mindsets. So on one hand, people have a fixed mindset, and on the other side, they've got a growth mindset. So what does that mean? Well, people with a fixed mindset have a desire to look smart, and people with a growth mindset have a desire to learn. And so that results in, if you have a fixed mindset, you tend to avoid challenges, whereas a growth mindset embraces challenges. And don't you know, this is as challenging a time as we could have. And so as you can see from as we develop this idea, we have a choice. We can go one way or the other. When it comes to obstacles, people with a fixed mindset give up easily, And those with a growth mindset persist in the face of setbacks. And if you have a fixed mindset, you see effort is useless. And on the other side, effort is the path to mastery. People with a fixed mindset avoid criticism. And on the other side, we learn from criticism. And if you have a fixed mindset, you feel threatened by the success of others. And on the other side, you find lessons. And so ultimately, what that means, bottom line, is if you have a fixed mindset, you plateau early and achieve less. And if you have a growth mindset, you reach ever higher levels of achievement. So the fixed mindset's focused on judgment, growth mindset is focused on improvement. And what does that sound like? What are you saying to yourself? Well, the judgment or fixed is, I'm so stupid, I'm awesome, I can't do math, this is hard, she's so smart. The other side is, what am I missing? I seem to be on the right track, and you can see they're more open-ended and exploring. And the one that I find most interesting in here is this on the judgment side, where it says, I'm awesome at this. Well, that sounds like a fairly positive statement, and it is, and yet you can see that it is also a limiting statement in that it presumes that there's no way to become better. Whereas on the counterpoint to that, I seem to be on the right track, acknowledges where you're on the path, but are looking to expand and continue to grow. If you're interested in your own mindset, there's a little test online. I don't know that it's that great, but if you're interested in exploring what your own mindset is, let me suggest that you go to Mindset Online /test your mindset. So that's our conversation today. When I first read this book, I was a bit disappointed with it. I felt like, oh man, that's it. That's what the whole world, that's all there is to it. People either have a fixed or growth mindset. And I thought it was kind of limiting and not that helpful. But as I thought about it some more, I started to make some connections with other bits of advice and learnings that other people have offered over the years. And when I started to recognize is that Carol's perspective was just simply another perspective on a universal principle. And my goal here is to, in the next little bit, talk about the 3 or 4 connections I made and see if you don't agree that, in fact, these are universal truths. So the first of which is Stephen Covey wrote, just the classic book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the first of those habits is be proactive. And the key to that is you are response able, in other words, able to choose your response. What does that mean? Proactive people focus their efforts on their circle of control. Reactive people focus their effort on their circle of concern. What does that mean? Well, your circle of concern is everything others are saying or doing or outside of your influence. And you can see on the left-hand side that diminishes who you are, your agency, your influence, your ability to make a difference. I made that example here of bad drivers. I can tell you that that's what I struggle with still, because I get cut off in traffic and I lose my circle of concern, circle of control real fast. The circle of control is everything you have control over. And as you can see on the left-hand side, that's where your personal power comes from. This is where you get to create your own future with your words, thoughts, reactions, etc. So anytime we think the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. Anytime we think the problem's out there, that thought is the problem. And so in the circumstance today where our environment, our context is under massive disruption, if we choose to let that disruption take control or otherwise let us become victims of that disruption, that's in fact the outcome we're going to get. And so we have to then provide the leadership, the guidance, both for our own selves, our own mindset, and in turn, everyone around us who's going to be looking to us for leadership. The next one I had, the next connection I made is a guy who came up with this idea of your locus of control. It was a guy named Julian Rotter. He did this in 1954. And if you have an internal locus of control, you can see there on the left-hand side, you make things happen. If you have an external locus of control, well, then things happen to you. And that sounds to me a lot like fixed versus growth mindset, and a lot like your circle of control. And then the third connection is Jack Canfield, who is best known for Chicken Soup of the Soul. in all of those books, but he's also a thought leader on success. He wrote a book called The Success Principles. And in it, he expressed the first of those success principles is E plus R equals O, where event plus response equals outcome. Something happens, you do something about it, and it produces an outcome. And in the way that he expresses this idea, the only thing you have control over is what you choose to do, your response. You don't like the outcome that produced, well, then you have to choose a different response, which is, you know, pretty much what Julian Rotter said, what Carol Dweck said, what Stephen Covey has been saying. So if you want to do a little extra reading on this, let me suggest to you that 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a book that everyone, I can't recommend it highly enough. And on the other side, Jack Canfield's got the 63 success principles, the first of which is E plus R equals O. And then Julian Rotter, the guy in the pipe, is the one who talked about the locus of control. And then the fourth connection is this idea of above and below the line. So people who live below the line blame others, make excuses, or deny there's even a problem, and people above the line take ownership, they take accountability, and they're responsible. And so if you're below the line, BED, you're in bed. If you're above the line, OAR, you have your oar in the water and you're leading, driving your boat to its ultimate destiny of success. So people below the line experience a sense of stress because they don't feel like they have control. And so that, you know, creates the victim mentality. And people above the line have low stress because in the victim mentality, they have agency, they have control. They're the ones who steer their own boat or use the oar in the water. If you're below the line, the wind and the currents push your boat wherever it just randomly happens to go. Whereas if you're above the line, you use your sail and oar to guide your boat, yourself to where you ultimately want to get to. So I did a little mind map here to kind of see if we couldn't put all that together. And you can see that there's the growth versus the fixed. And in every one of these cases, there is the green, the proactive side, and the red, the reactive side. And so Stephen's book, Be Proactive, Locus of Control, E plus R equals O, Play Above the Line. There's a universal theme here. And so all 5 of these reference points are about the same principle of you are the master of your own destiny, and you get to choose whether you're going to be a victim of the circumstances or a victor. So I don't know if there's any questions about any of that. If you've got some, feel free to throw them in the chat box. I'll take them as we go. I don't see any at the minute, but if they come along, we'll come back to this and get a chance to talk. So we've been talking about, you know, your mindset and the principles of success, and that sort of leads us to the next part of the question, which is, who am I? What is your mindset? And so let me unpack that a little bit. On one hand, the only thing we ever get to see of people is what they say and do. And that's in the form of words, actions, behavior, decisions, physiology. And by that, I mean your tone of voice and body language and, you know, perspiration and that kind of thing. And that's the only thing that's observable. It's things that we can actually visibly observe. And that's what drives results. On the input side, it's your ideas, skills, words, knowledge. And those are informed by your goals. But for all of us, it goes through a mindset. So we've been talking about mindset. And what is mindset? Well, let me suggest to you that mindset is made up of these 5 things. And let's spend the next few minutes talking about what these 5 things are. So what's a belief? Well, what's the first few words that come to mind when I say the word salesperson? Think about that for a second. What's the first word that you would blurt out if someone were to say to you, what do you think about salespeople? And so for lots of people, they come up with, you know, this guy from Fargo who was kind of weaselly and dishonest, the classic used car sales guy. And other people think about, you know, pushy and manipulative and Glengarry Glen Ross, ABC Always Be Closing. And, you know, other people think about fast talking, slick, like this character in The Wolf of Wall Street. And so here's the thing about selling. All of us on this call are in the business of persuasion, are in the business of selling or having people come around to our point of view. And so there's kind of a elephant in the room, isn't there? And by elephant in the room, my way of defining that is that both parties in this room recognize there's an elephant, but neither of them are addressing. And so the elephant in the room is, hey, we're all salespeople, and yet we're, choosing to kind of ignore it. And so what would your beliefs, what would you have to think about selling so that you could in fact think that selling was a gift? And so the way to shift about that is for many of us who are in sales, we think it's more about what our product and service. And so we become internally focused because we're trying to present our product or service. And as soon as, if you were to make the shift from who likes to be sold, almost no one likes to be sold, and yet everyone loves to buy. And so if we make the shift from selling to helping another person buy, that in fact then becomes a gift because we're helping the other person and guide them in an area where we're expert and they're looking to acquire some of that expertise, that we're helping guide them to making the decision that's best for them. And so that's a way that you can think about the shift in how you think about selling. What are the first three words when I say the word money? Well, again, that opens up a lot of things. People often think about spending or bills or not enough or other people. Let me describe for you this money mindset. So an employee thinks about earning a salary, and that's how their money mindset is earning a salary. A self-employed person, on the other hand, makes money. You can see there's a slightly different verb there, isn't there? In fact, take more agency and control. At the next rung on the ladder, an owner receives profit. And so at this stage, an owner has a arm's length third-party entity from which they receive profit, and their level of engagement in that business depends on where they are on the owner entrepreneurial ladder. At the next level up, an investor has an entirely different mindset about money because they're using a return on investment. And at the entrepreneur level, Warren Buffett doesn't work for money, money works for him. And so you can see that's an entirely different thought. If you're to give, someone, the average middle class person thinks that the purpose of money is to spend. And if you give that person a lot of money, they're likely just going to spend lots. And so, you know the story you've read of the guy who wins the lottery, the person who wins the lottery, and 5 years later, they're broke because that person with that money mindset thinks, well, with a lot of money, I'm just going to spend lots. Whereas at the entrepreneur level, that person, if they were to, win the lottery, they would think about, how do I employ this money? How do I get some leverage from this money? Or, if it was Warren Buffett or Jimmy Patterson, they may be buying a new boat, but they're able to do that because they've had that money mindset all of this time. So the way that I think about beliefs is a belief is an equivalent to an opinion. It's an opinion that we hold to be true, and that while you're entitled to your opinion, it doesn't mean that your opinion is actually best, wisest, or even accurate. You're entitled to your opinion, but not entitled to your facts. So a belief is a little like an opinion that we hold to be true. And so then what's a value? Well, in this context, how do we make the distinction between beliefs and values? And lots of people would use these terms interchangeably. But for today, I'd like to make a distinction that values are concepts that we hold to be important. So what are values? Values would be like parental values, integrity, honesty. These are universal principles that we adopt from persons of authority in our lives. So that could be our parents, it could be our teachers, it could be the community, it could be our faith. Values are external sources that we hold to be true, whereas beliefs tend to be stuff we make up internally as a result of their experiences. So the source of beliefs, the source of opinions comes from a different place than the source of values. And that's where that distinction is, the change between stuff I make up and stuff, values, those that I adopt. And then what's our identity? Let's move on to the next thing. Our identity is anything we say to ourselves about ourselves when no one else is looking. Our identity is made up by the things we say to ourselves about ourselves when no one else is looking. So, and those statements tend to be, I am, I can, or I can't. I am, I can, or I can't. And so we can make choices about how we describe our identity. If we're in victim mode, our identity is how we interpret our experiences through the lens of being a victim. If we're in victor mode, we interpret those same events in an entirely different way. Culture is, how does culture act as influence over our mindset? Let me describe for you a little circumstance that I had. I was traveling in Japan and I got on a train, and in this car, there might have been 50 people in the car. And it was astonishing for me to realize that not just was I the tallest person in this car, in this train car, I was in fact the only non-Japanese person. And when you contrast that to getting on, you know, the subway in Toronto or the Canada Line here in Vancouver or wherever your town is, I can promise you that when you get on the train here, it's going to be representing the United Nations, just a broad, broad spectrum. And so how does that influence our culture? Well, if you live on an island, as Japan is, they have a different perspective of what culture means. And then the final version, how does our environment influence our mindset? The question, the tease I have for you is, where would be the worst place to send a criminal? And of course, the worst place to send a criminal is to jail, because they're only going to be hanging out with other criminals, and how could they not, in fact, become more of a criminal? Or put it as Jim Rohn would say, you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. You're the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And think about what would happen if you had an opportunity to hang out with, you know, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and how that would shift your mindset if we had that opportunity to change. So if you want to change your mindset, one of the most powerful ways to do that is change who you hang out with. You can see I'm just capturing a note here. There's a comment here: who I am applies to an individual, a small team, a department, a company, division, and a company. Absolutely. Culture or mindset is not just about the individual, but it's the collection of individuals. And all you have to do is think about how the mindset, the culture that's, you know, the Marines as an example, or the Navy SEALs have in military terms. They have a very pronounced culture. And to be a member of that group, you have to successfully adopt the culture of that group. And so you can see here, my point is that mindset is also on a continuum from more prevalent or conscious to subconscious. And so there's a guy named Lewin who came up with this phrase that behavior is a function of a person and their environment. And while I think that that's true, I also would say that behavior is a function of a person and their mindset. I think that's a more comprehensive, inclusive way of thinking about behavior. And let's go ahead and I'll teasingly call this Nuremberg's equation. So how does this all influence this? Let me introduce you to a guy named Ilya Prigogine, who got one of these. He got a Nobel Prize because he discovered and described this equation here. And the key part of it is this thing called the maximization, reverse the maximization of entropy. And so entropy is this idea, colloquially, we know it as everything in nature grows and then dies. And so his Nobel Prize was that you could reverse the effects of entropy. And the word he coined for this is perturbation. Through perturbation, you can reverse the effects of entropy. And as you can see, the root word of perturbation is perturb. And the way this principle works is that if you apply enough pressure to a substance in a contained space, you can reverse the effects of entropy. In other words, instead of coal turning to coal dust, you could, in fact, apply enough pressure and it would become a diamond. So one form of carbon becomes another form of carbon. And so how does perturbation apply to us as humans? You know, how does this metaphor work for us day to day? Well, let me make the case that it does in how we think about our comfort zone. So everything you have today is the result of your ability to expand your comfort zone, and yet everything you want, everything you wish to grow into, is just outside your comfort zone, and that's where the magic happens. But as you get to the edge of your comfort zone, what do you experience? You experience perturbation. You can't help but experience the idea that as you get to the edge of your comfort zone, by definition, you get uncomfortable because it's a place of uncertainty. If you, in fact, don't wish to push the outer edges of your comfort zone, that's your dying zone. And so everything in nature is either growing or dying. I had the fortune of learning this through an experience that I had. Let me describe that for you. So I'm was a pretty avid skier. I'd ski as much as 50 days a week. And to give you a bit of context, that's me on that particular slope. And so that you have an idea of what the scale is, those are 2 snowcats. I went skiing in an area that was remote, and we got around the resort in the snowcat. And I tell you all of this for this reason. So I used to ski like 50 days a year, and you know, I was a fairly accomplished skier. Amateur skier is certainly not a professional skier, but it was pretty competent as an amateur skier. And so we used to go to all kinds of, you know, locations in the bush, in the forest, because we always wanted to ski on fresh powder snow. And then I took a job which had me move to Toronto. And so for about 5 years, the only time I ever got to ski was late in the year in March. I'd go out, come out here and go to Whistler. And I had this discovery where, oh my God, the places that I used to go so comfortably now, you know, because I'd only been in the mountains for a day or two, and my buddies were going to all these places we used to ski comfortably in, now I was scared. My comfort zone had shrunk, because even just being in the mountains themselves was a bit unrattling. If you come from Toronto or someplace where they're, you know, it's pretty flat, just being in the mountains itself was something that was kind of, you know, pushed you to the edge of your comfort zone. And here I was skiing in places that used to be at one time very comfortable, that in fact hadn't, became less comfortable. And so it's the circumstance where I learned about this idea of growing or dying, pushing the edge of your comfort zone or not. And I'm sure you people on the call can recognize those occasions where they may have pushed to the edge of their comfort zone and experienced discomfort. And so the other side of that, though, is that if we grow too far, well past our growing zone, we can go into the panic zone. And if we go too far, even beyond that, we can go into the danger zone. And when we experience the danger zone, that's when we shut down. That's when we, you know, in that space, we don't have the means, the capacity, the mental wherewithal to be capable of driving ourselves forward. And so in this environment that we find ourselves today, you know, with the coronavirus that is, you know, a pandemic, we can experience or get to this place where we're in the panic zone and or the danger zone. And if we do, that tends to have us shut down. And as Warren Buffett would say, that's when we find out who was swimming without a causey. And so now, even more than ever, both internally ourselves and the people who depend on us, our spouses, our families, the team we work with, our suppliers, our customers, need us to be in the place where we're leading the way and avoiding slipping into the panic or danger zone. This even has an equation. These guys in 1910, Yerkes-Dodson law came up with this idea that you can see on the y-axis performance increases, and on the x-axis relative to the amount of tension, arousal, anxiety. And you can see right at the top of the bell curve, there's an optimal arousal, optimal performance. And if you go too far past it, you know, if you go too far past beyond your comfort zone, as I showed in the past slide, we get to this place of panic. And if I can offer you a thought about this, think about this question. Have you ever wondered how someone who is an Olympian, let's say an ice dancer, or let's say a downhill racer, and they're about to go out onto the Olympic ice, and the next 2 minutes are going to define the rest of their life. Think about how much pressure that might be. And I often thought it was notable that when you hear these people being interviewed, these competitors and athletes, they often said, hey, I just want to go out there and have some fun. And I always thought that that was a bit of bravado and a bit of putting on a facade. You know, how could they possibly feel that way? And then, I had a couple of bits of insight, and one of which is that they didn't arrive there just that day. In other words, what I mean is, at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, they were competing in local events, community events, and that eventually became regional events. And then they went to college somewhere, and now they're competing nationally. And so they've put themselves in this position time and time again. And so they've been able to grow their comfort zone to where they're so comfortable in that space that they have the means, the capacity to be at their best, to be able to perform at their highest level because of the ability, the experience they've had in order to grow their comfort zone. And on a personal level, many of you on the call probably know that I've done a TEDx talk, and that's where I learned and got the insight that I was referring to about these Olympians. In preparation for the TED talk, the stats in my PowerPoint was that the PowerPoint was open for 22,000 minutes. So I'll save you the arithmetic. That equals 16 24-hour days. So between November, which is when I started, and May, which is when I delivered the TED talk, I was using PowerPoint to write the talk, to rehearse, to practice. And so on that day in May of 2015, I experienced what it was like to be that Olympian, because on that day, I was so prepared, so ready, that all I wanted to do was to deliver that result. And so, again, coming back to where we are today in our times of pandemic, everything you've done up until this point in history has prepared you for this moment. And the way that you define your identity is going to be how you move forward. And so let's talk about how can you define your identity. And let me start that thought with Dr. Seuss. Today you are you, that's truer than true. There's no one alive who's youer than you. A bit of universal wisdom from Dr. Seuss. And my question then for you is, what is the perfect you? Do you have a written definition of who you are, who you're becoming, who you are at your best? And if you don't, it'd be a little like, I'm going to tease you on the call here. I'm going to tease you by saying, would you get on an airplane if you knew the pilot did not file a navigation plan? Of course you wouldn't. Who would even consider that? That would be, insane. That'd be nuts. And yet, if you don't have a written definition of what your destination is, who you're becoming, who you are at your best, you're a little like that pilot without a navigation plan. So I said at the beginning, if the owner wants a better business, first the business needs a better owner. And so how do we go about that? Now we've defined mindset. How do we go about defining our own mindset, or writing for ourselves the best me we can be? And so let me give you the example of Ben Franklin, who at the age of 20, he was returning back to Philadelphia on a sailboat from London. And at that age of 20, he wrote what he called his 13 virtues, which you can see listed out here on the left-hand side. So temperance is eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation, which sounds like don't get drunk. And silence, as an example, speak not what might benefit others, or avoid or yourself avoid trifling, so don't gossip. And you can see he laid that out, and here was his definition of the best me he could be. And what he did for the rest of his life is he had a chart. He had a little book that he would keep, and on the left-hand side you can see the first few letters of each of the 13 virtues, and on the X column he'd have the first days of the week. And his practice was then for the rest of his life, each week he would select one of his virtues. And so it looked like this week he selected silence. And at the end of the day, he would reflect on his day and consider how well did he hold himself, how well did he behave, did he hold himself up to his standard? And when he didn't, he marked that down with that little asterisk that you see here. And so to me, I'm guessing he got together with his buddies on Sunday and had a kind of a gossip session, and that was, you know, below the standard that he held for himself. And he would roll through all of these 1 week at a time. There's 13 of these, so that would mean he'd do one a quarter, each one in a 90-day, 3-month period, 4 times a year. And the philosophy was that he'd focus on one of them each week and the other 12 fall where they may. The other thing that I thought was remarkable about him on the right-hand side is you can see a pretty primitive, but nevertheless default diary. Here's how he planned his day so that he was able to match his day's priorities with how he spent his time. And so what does that look like in current times? Let me describe for you. If our identity is made up of what we say to ourselves about ourselves, our I am statements, then my suggestion to you is that the best way to do that is to have a set of affirmations. And so a way that you can act on Ben Franklin's idea is to have a set of affirmations that define who you are at your best, who you intend to be, how you intend to show up each and every day. And you can do that with affirmations. Now, these happen to be my affirmations. I visit with them regularly. I won't claim to do as much as what Ben Franklin talked about, but from time to time, as I feel the need to re-anchor my identity, I go back to these, and it helps me reset who I expect myself to be. These are mine. You're happy to take a screenshot if you wish and adopt these as yours. But what I'd say to you is they're likely not that meaningful. And so let me offer some suggestions about how to come up with your own affirmations if you want to go ahead with that idea. So first of all, start with the words I am. The most powerful 2 words in the English dictionary are the things you say to yourself about yourself. So those are I am. You want to state it in the present. And state it in the positive, affirm what you want, not what you don't want. And to help me make that point, let me tease you a little bit. And my tease is this: don't think of a polar bear. And of course, you can't help but imagine a polar bear goes through your mind, and then you avert that by thinking of someone else or something else, pardon me. And so my point is this: the brain can't do a negative. It can't do a don't. It can only do a do. And so if you don't want to think of a polar bear, you got to think of anything else, an apple. So state your affirmations and who you want to be, not what you're looking to avoid. Now, if you're looking for a more complete explanation, let me point you in the direction of Jack Canfield's guide here, Daily Affirmations for Success, a step-by-step guide. If you Google the phrase Jack Canfield, how to do affirmations, you can find it'll come up in the 2nd or 3rd listing. And if you have any challenges with that, feel free to use this link, timewithjohn.com, and that'll link you to my calendar and set us up for a 15-minute Zoom call. I'd be happy to talk to you about your own affirmations or how to act on some of these ideas, or if you've got a question or a comment or something you want to share, I'm happy to do that. Timewithjohn.com, and that'll link you to my Calendly link. Timewithjohn.com is easier to remember than calendly.com/W5coaching. So as I say, the 2 most powerful words in the English language are the 2 words I am. A guy named James Clear wrote the book called Atomic Habits. Let me recommend it to you. It's an awesome, off the charts, must read kind of book for anyone who's interested in personal performance. And one of the insights that he has in this book is this idea of compounding. In other words, if you get 1% every day for a year, that's going to result in an increase of 38%. So tiny little changes, doing affirmations even once, twice, 3 times a week, even if you don't get to it every day, those tiny little changes in the moment, you won't be able to detect the difference. But over the course of a year, that'll make a massive change, a compound difference. Whereas if you choose to avoid or ignore, you know, a 1% decline every day gets you down to 0.03%. The power of compounding. I'm going to stop share because I'm going to, hold on, let me just make sure that I share my screen in a way that allows everybody to hear this little video, because it's kind of fun. So let me start it again.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So sometimes people kind of tease me or say, hey, no way. So let me take you back to the beginning of this and just give you the chance to see it one more time.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
There. So what is all the point of that, or how does this apply to what we're talking about? Let me introduce you to an idea called your reticular formation. And you can see this little purple section. We have some people on the call who are in health practices, so they know about this thing. And your reticular is part of the primitive, or the first parts of our brain that got developed. And you can see that it's where all of our senses go through the reticular. So eyesight and auditory, all of our senses go through the reticular. And how does this apply to what our thought is today? It controls what you pay attention to. It creates blind spots. It decides on what is a threat and what you value. And so if you think back to the primitive part of our brain, when we're trying to avoid saber-toothed tigers, it was important that the brain recognizes a threat. And you know, that part of our brain is the part that, you know, is fight, flight, food, you know, the very lowest part of the Maslow's hierarchy. It also is the part of the brain, you know, if you're, after 10 minutes, if you don't see that saber-toothed tiger moving, then the brain, you know, sort of relaxes and creates this blind spot. And, you know, the example of that I'd give is, you know, how many times have you gone out shopping for something, say for a new car as an example, and you then leave the dealership and for the first time start to notice everywhere you go, you see that model of car, because your reticular has been set. You've kind of programmed your brain to pay attention to it. You know, for many parents, that when they first learned they were pregnant, now suddenly everywhere they go, they can't help but notice baby carriages. And again, something that wasn't relevant a month ago becomes of primary importance because you've set your reticular. How it creates blind spots is the other side of that. A personal example, in the early 80s, I moved into an apartment in West Vancouver that happens to be along a railroad line that was servicing and brought goods up into the interior of the province I've lived in. And it would go by this apartment on the waterfront at about 4 a.m. And so the first day or two, I'm woken at 4 a.m. and I think, oh my God, what have I done? I'm going to be awake every day at 4 o'clock because, you know, this train is going to go by on its daily schedule. But don't you know, after about 2 weeks, you don't hear the train at all. Your reticular has recognized that train, even though it's making the same amount of noise, it doesn't warrant your attention. It's not a saber-toothed tiger, and so you can safely ignore it. And that's how the reticular creates blind spots. So how does this all apply to our discussion about mindset, you can set your reticular. So in the cases of, you've are looking for a car, you can set your reticular because it is the thing that the law of attraction kind of depends on, that if you set what you think about is what you bring about. You can set your goals. When you set goals, in fact, you're directing your reticular to pay attention to everything that's going to help you achieve that goal. And so you can set your reticular to become the person you wish to become by declaring what exactly you are, who you're choosing to become. And so the Navy SEALs have a way of putting it: get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because everything you want is just on the other side of being uncomfortable. And so that means that we need to, or get to, embrace perturbation. So the way that you think about that discomfort is either going to help you have a closed mindset where you shrink away from criticism, or an open mindset where you embrace criticism, embrace the environment, embrace the circumstances, because that's the best way to go forward. And so become the best you can be. In order to become the best you can be, if you wish to have a better business, first become a better owner. Work harder on yourselves than you do on your business. That's Jim Rohn. And don't wish that it was easier, wish that you were better. Don't wish for less problems, wish for more skills. Don't wish for less challenge, wish for more wisdom, which is about as direct a way of saying embrace an open mindset. And so Josh Whedon put it this other way: identity is something that you're constantly earning. It's a process that you must be active in. And so let me stop here for a minute, and I see that there's a couple of questions that I'll just catch up on. So there's someone who's saying, gee, I've got a great bunch of people working in the office, all of whom I can afford to keep employed. I also have a team of contractors. Some of them are engaged and working, assisting with pivoting our service to operate on a video. Other contractors seem to be checking out. For example, I received an email yesterday saying she was going to take a break from now until April 30th and enjoy time with her family. Do you have any recommendations on how to keep your team members engaged? Well, the person asking that question, it all comes down to culture. How you set the culture, how you create a culture where people come to agree on how we treat each other, how we treat our employees, how we treat our patients, our clients, how we treat those people around us. That's how I define culture. And so the first thing I would say to you, Kim, who asked that question, is have people define who they wish to be during this time of massive change. And then the second thing is, how is the culture different for your employees than it is for the contractors? So here's the thing about culture: you don't get the culture you want, you get the culture you deserve. And so how can you proactively design the culture for the contractors so they feel that they wish to be, if anything, even at a higher level of participation? And so, another way that I describe this idea of culture is by offering the metaphor of the story of going to the restaurant and you order a bottle of wine. You're about to celebrate something, so you order a very expensive bottle of wine to mark the occasion, and the server brings out the wine and offers a little for you in your glass, and you pick up the glass to sample the wine, and you notice the glass isn't dirty, it is filthy. What would you expect the restaurant to do? Well, in that circumstance, they'd certainly have to make up in some way, exchange the glass, of course, but they've poured out an ounce or so of this very expensive wine, so you're not going to have, they have to eat the cost of that and bring you a fresh new bottle, and in fact, they have to make up and probably offer you something on the house, some dessert or something like that. So here's my point: even though the wine was the best you might have ever ordered, the glass wasn't appropriate. And so how this idea fits to the idea of culture is it doesn't matter how good the content is if the context isn't set correctly. And so context is culture. It's the rules of the game. It's how you're going to show up. Or in other words, you can teach someone how to pass a puck, how to do a slap shot, a wrist shot, how to skate. You can do everything that it takes to become a good hockey player, but if you don't teach someone the rules of the game, the rules of hockey, there's no way they can play hockey. And so they may be great practitioners, but how do you set the culture so that even in your absence, even while you're not there in the clinic, you know how people are behaving towards each other, towards your patients or clients, because you've set the culture, and the culture dictates how people are going to show up. So hopefully that helps you with that thought. So again, during these challenging times, I thought there's got to be a way that I can step up and offer something that's helpful and useful, and that's for my existing clients, for past clients, for prospects. It's an open forum. It's a place where you can come to do a brain dump if that's what's necessary for you to get inspired from others on the in the room that might have some ideas or how to address your challenges. I'm going to start it in April 8th. I started sooner, but I have some time commitments on April the 1st. So this is going to happen in about 2 weeks' time. It's going to be at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern. The link to the Zoom room, you can get there by going to huddlewithjohn.ca, and that'll get you to sign up. If anyone sends me an email, I'll send you happily a calendar invite so you can have that on a recurring basis. I hope that people join me in this place. And what I've learned about these kinds of events is the more people that are there and the better the questions are, the more provocative the questions are, the more value that everyone gets on the call. So feel free to show up with your toughest, the toughest challenge that you've got on your plate, and let's see if we can't use this as a time to explore and discover, rather than being the Aussies. The Warren Buffett says, we'll see who was swimming without a swimsuit when the tide goes out. The Aussies have a way of saying that. We'll see who was swimming without a causey when the tide goes out. Let's be the ones that survive, that thrive, that in fact find a way to move forward. Because here's the thing. The choice at the minute, if you could just boil it down, is to give up, give in, or just simply giver. And if you give up or give in, you've kind of, left your fate to destiny. So really the only choice to go forward is to giver, to embrace the opportunity to reframe this as a time where we can demonstrate that we're the ones who are going to thrive even in the most dire of circumstances. And as Howard Marks said, you can't predict, but you can prepare. And so some of that preparation can come in by joining us in the peer group. I'm hopeful that you'll join us. The last thing I want to think about, or have you think about, is this idea of be, do, have. What does be, do, have? So who do I need to be so that I can do in order to have? And so the victim says, well, when I have enough things, I'll do what it takes so I can be a happy person. The worker says, hey, I got to do so much so that I can have in order to be happy. Whereas the victor says, who do I need to be? Start with the be. Who's the best being I can be? What is my affirmations? How do I have to show up every day so that I can do what it takes in order to have what I'm looking for? And so who do I need to be as a leader? Who do I need to be as a father, as a parent, as a husband, as a spouse, as a leader in the community? Who do I need to be or wish to be today so that I can have the team do what they need to do so that we can all have what we're looking for as an outcome? Gandhi put it this way: your belief becomes your thoughts, thoughts become words, words become action, action become habits, habits become values, and values become your destiny. And so let me stop here. That's what I had in mind for our time together today. This idea that you can shape your destiny in the way that you want by shaping, first of all, who you're going to show up and who you're going to be. And that ultimately, rather than being the pilot who doesn't have a navigation plan, have a written definition of the best you can be. And a great way to do that is to have a written definition and to have affirmations. I'm sorry, I got mixed up there. I just saw a message come through. Hopefully that has been helpful for people on the call. I genuinely, that's my fervent desire that this was great for you. If you've got another question or two, I'm going to stay on the call for another minute. Feel free to reach out to me if timewithjohn.com if you want to reach out privately or personally and have something to discuss. If there isn't any questions, I'm going to say, hey, thanks for taking your time, your precious time to be together with us on the call. Hopefully you've got something for your time, that your investment was a worthwhile investment of your time, and that you've got at least 1 or 2 or 3 actionable items that you'll address or do in the next day or two as we go forward. Thanks again, everybody. Timewithjohn.com is the link to get access to the calendar. And if you want to join us in the peer-to-peer resource center, go to huddlewithjohn.ca, huddlewithjohn.ca. So timewithjohn.com is a private, personal 15-minute call. Huddle with John is to join us on April the 8th. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. Good luck with everything that we've got going on, and hope to talk to you or see you real soon. Cheers. Bye for now.